Hello, I'm Dan Cook with BoneZone, and welcome to another edition of Ortho Innovators, sponsored by Elos MedTech. Today I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. David Kirschman, co-founder of Orthomod, a company dedicated to innovating the next generation of structural biomaterials. Dr. Kirschman, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So you were a spine surgeon in a past life and part of 4 successful companies and have 55 issued U.S. patents. Tell me a little bit about your background and your journey to Orthomod.
I was a neurosurgeon practicing here in Dayton, Ohio, and I had invented a couple of new spinal implants and decided, for whatever crazy reason, to start a company to manufacture them, and got together with some manufacturing partners here and started a company called X-Spine Systems. We grew that company over about 10 years to about 40 million in revenue. Wound up exiting that to Bacterin, became Extant Medical, worked with them for a period of time. Then I had a couple of other companies, one in the infection control space, one in the surgical irrigation space. And now I'm back to my first love, which is orthopedics and spine, and we're doing it.
Yeah, what are you focused on at Orthomod, and what are some of the technologies you're developing?
Well, Orthomod kind of started with a fundamental question in orthopedics, and a fundamental challenge, which was you sort of have this duality when it comes to orthopedic implants. One is the strong stuff, the fixation components, your PEEK and titanium screws and plates and anchors. And then on the other hand, you have your biologics, your orthobiologics, which are, osteoconductive and heal bone and are regenerative. And so, I started off thinking, and it's a problem that I've been thinking about for 20 years, which is how come no one has ever been able to develop a product that truly does both, that's truly regenerative, but is strong enough to make a screw out of? And handles the cyclical loads of the spine or of joints. And no one had been able to do that. And so I thought that was a really cool problem to try to solve, because I knew that, it would change the industry fundamentally if you could kind of figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the kernel that started this company.
So you set out to create an implant that was both structural and osteoactive. What are some of the challenges faced in developing that kind of device, and how did you overcome them?
Well, there are a number of challenges. The osteoactive part was the fairly straightforward part. There's a lot of materials that are known to be osteoconductive, such as calcium phosphates and hydroxyapatites and that sort of thing. The hard part was the structural part, was taking that stuff and making it strong enough that it can handle cyclical loads. So what we did is we worked with a group out of MIT that specializes in high-tech polymers, and work with them to develop a kind of a polymer backbone to mix with the HATCP and create something that was super strong, and at the same time do it in a way that would be fully biocompatible. And so what we did was we kind of limited ourselves to a very short list of implanted polymers, polymers that had a history of long-term implantation, over the past, 50 years or what have you.
Sure.
And so we baked a new cake, but the ingredients of the cake had to be materials that already had a good safety record in implantation. And so that's kind of the limitation that we started from, and we just tested and tested and tested. We tested everything under the sun until we finally got one that we were happy with, and that had the adequate performance capabilities.
And that is the camp? Is that the
right? Yeah. That's the camp. Right.
And tell us about that. What specifically it's made of, and some of the properties that make it really effective in the spine.
Yeah. Well. CAMP, it stands for calcium acrylic modified polymer, so it uses an acrylic backbone modified in a couple of ways. What's the modified part? It's modified because you added bioceramics to it that promote fusion. And it's also modified because it's treated with gamma irradiation to increase cross-linking and improve biomechanical performance. And so that's what it is. Like I said, it's undergone very significant animal testing as well as biomechanical testing to show that it has performance equivalent to PEEK and titanium as far as overall performance in the spine, and ultimately for other orthopedic applications.
Yeah, can you tell me about some of those tests, the results you found, and also, some of the testing you had to conduct and the challenges there and how you addressed them?
Oh yeah, a lot of testing. Well, first the mechanical testing, like for in the spine, there's the ASTM F2077, which is the intervertebral fatigue, so 5 million cycles, and you have to basically put a ton of force on this thing. 5 million, put it on and take it off 5 million times without any kind of defect happening, not a single crack or anything. And so we had to do that, and then of course there's also not just the axial test, but there's torsion where you're twisting it, and as well as shear loading, and then there's also subsidence, expulsion. There's all the static testing that had to be done. So it's basically all the tests that any other spinal implant has to do, but it's a new material that had never been tested in that way before. And then on the biological side, you have all the biocompatibility tests, which is part of what they call ISO 10993, looking at all the different inflammatory markers. We do animal studies. We work with Dr. Bill Walsh down in Australia to do sheep studies, where we did sheep implantation and looked for fusion. The fusion actually was quite superior to PEEK and titanium. That data was presented at ORS last year. So we're real excited about that, but at the same time, histological studies showed no evidence of inflammation or rejection in any way. So we were excited about that. And then you also have your chemical characterization, so the really high-tech methods for looking at every possible chemical component that's in the material. And so we had to do that as well, using infrared techniques, etc. And so that just kind of covers the top level of it. There's a lot more, but I don't want to bore your audience with it. But there's a lot of hoops to jump through. Even though this isn't an all new material, it's new enough that we really had to cover all the bases.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for that. And it is a lot. And where do you stand now on the development of it? Where are we in terms of commercialization, or just give us a status report on it?
Yeah. So we're at the FDA right now. So we submitted our FDA application. It's a 510K, but it's at the very limit of what you can do in a 510K. And we've had multiple meetings with the FDA to finally decide that it was indeed a 510K because those materials had been used in the past. And so we're working our way through the process. And hopefully we'll have the first cervical intervertebral implant ready to launch in the first half of 26.
Great. Okay. Your company's injection molding manufacturing method uses 3D printed disposable molds.
Yep.
Tell us about that process and how it affects scalability and cost. It's very interesting.
Yeah. So when we first started this, our initial goal was to 3D print the material directly, but we just weren't happy with the implant. It just wasn't up to the standards of the industry and what a surgeon would expect. You have these horizontal shear lines through the implant that creates weakness. And so we wanted the strongest possible implant and also the best possible quality. And so we came upon this concept of 3D printing a mold a water-soluble mold that's temporary, essentially, and then injection molding that. And so we then 3D print the mold very quickly using just plastic type materials that are disposable, and then injection mold it. We manufacture the injection molding pellet out of our proprietary material, and the parts just come out beautiful. They're fully isotropic, so they're equally strong in all directions. There's no shear lines, and we can make any geometry, including geometries that would be impossible to make with traditional molding, because things that have internal geometries that you would never be able to get in a traditional metal mold. And at the same time, it sounds like a complex process, but once you kind of get the hang of it, it's actually a very fast and inexpensive process. Injection molding is an industrial process. You're as quick as you can push the button, the machine is shooting that stuff in. It can be scaled up very easily, and then the molds themselves are very inexpensive. They're just made out of a water-soluble type plastic material, and they're 3D printed, and then we can stock those by the warehouse full and just shoot them, and we can do multiple parts per mold, and then you just wash the mold away, and there's your part. So it really is the best of both worlds. So it gives you the flexibility of 3D printing, but at the same time gives you the quality of a fully molded product and the strength of a fully molded product. So it's really the best of both worlds. And one of the nice things about Camp versus, say, Peak is that it can be molded at relatively low pressures and relatively low temperatures. So it's very easy to mold, and that helps reduce time, cost, and complexity of the overall molding process.
Gotcha. You've called Camp a disruptive technology because it's the first new structural biomaterial in orthopedics in over 2 decades.
Yep.
What excites you most about its potential, not just in spine, but perhaps across numerous applications?
Yeah, it's really going to change the paradigm. When you talk about, for instance, Peak cages in spine, they're using the same cages that I used in my residency in the 1990s are still being used today, by and large. There's a desperate need for another choice that is regenerative. And, people have been beating around the bush of the problem. They've been taking Peak and coating it with titanium, or they've been taking titanium and coating it with Peak, or they've been coating it with HATCP, but that doesn't actually provide ingrowth. There's been a lot of sort of need for this solution, but no one's been able to figure it out. So that's the thing that excites me about it, is that it really represents a paradigm shift in how people think about orthopedic biomaterials, and that we can blur the line between, well, what's a biologic and what's a fixation product, and then ultimately my ultimate goal that I'm excited about is to really not require biologics at all. Have the implant be the biologic where you don't even need a separate biologic. And that's something that someday we would like to be able to reach. And the other thing that really excites me about it is that it's a platform technology with so many applications. So there's applications, and we've already talked to a lot of people about sports medicine applications like suture anchors and ACL interference screws, and craniomaxillofacial implants, and implants for cancer. Dental implants is a huge industry that we're really excited about, because this is an ideal material for dental. Because if you're familiar with dental implants, there's a fusion part that gets screwed into the maxilla, and then there's kind of a tooth part that sort of is put on later. Well, we can do a one-stage device that both is the tooth, because this super hard material, and is the post that fuses. So you can actually just do a single-stage dental implant, and that's kind of a holy grail product as well, and a huge industry. So we're excited about that, and have been talking to some partners in the dental industry about that. So really, one of the challenges we have is that there's just so many different verticals that we can kind of attack. I mean, it's thrilling, but at the same time, it's a little bit overwhelming when you think about the potential applications for this.
Dr. Kirschman, you have a background as a spinal surgeon. Can you talk about how that has informed your experience on the medical device side? Just having that clinical background and tapping into the expertise of surgeons to design devices that actually work in practice.
Oh yeah, this is surgeon entrepreneurship is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. I've actually done talks to surgeon groups about this topic, and I think it's great. Coming from the clinical side, and designing products, by actually having the expertise of having your hands on these products, having implanted these products, having used these products, it gives you a unique perspective on the industry and the clinical aspects that no one else can pretend to have. And no matter what they say, even your most talented engineers, even your most talented product managers, and there's great ones out there, they still have not actually used the product. And it's like designing a car, and you could be a great car designer, but if you don't have a driver's license and have never actually driven one, it's going to put some fundamental limitations on what you could really do. And so I encourage surgeons to continue to be entrepreneurial, and the real challenge with surgeons is to get them to understand the business side of the industry, understand what the real needs are from a business standpoint, not just from a product standpoint, because there's been so many product companies with great products that don't go anywhere, and a lot of companies with mediocre products that somehow become successful. And so yeah, I think it does inform, especially now where surgeons have less autonomy than they used to have, to be able to sort of be entrepreneurial and to get more involved in the industry side of things. I think it creates, an important outlet for surgeons to be able to maintain their kind of natural creativity outside of sort of the stifling environment of the hospital sometimes.
And on the flip side, does it also, create opportunity for an orthopedic company to tap into their expertise too on the design side? Get them involved in the front end of some of these devices.
Oh yeah, I mean it's been said for a long time that the industry works best when the clinicians and the companies work together and are on the same side. And so certainly becoming a KOL for a company, helping with design, those sorts of things, helping with new products, I think is something that's very important. I think that people need to approach it, surgeons should approach it from a standpoint of advancing the science. You might not necessarily get rich, because, these companies didn't get to be multi-billion-dollar companies by giving away the profits.
Sure.
But I think it's a great way to advance the science, and build those partnerships.
What do you think are the biggest barriers to innovation in orthopedics today, and how can they be overcome? And also, just on the flip side, what excites you the most about the potential of, where the industry is moving?
Yeah. Well, that's quite a topic.
True.
I mean, in my opinion, the biggest barrier to innovation today are the hospitals. And the reason for that is that hospitals will not pay more for innovation, at this point. Hospitals are faced with, and in fairness, are faced with very difficult budgetary environments over the last several years, particularly post-pandemic. And there's just not a lot of extra resources for new technologies these days.
Right.
And we're really seeing that. And so, like for instance, with Orthomod, I have to make sure that we don't cost any more than what they're using today, because then it would just be an impossibility. Anything that increases the cost in any way, shape, or form, I mean, it's going to be DOA pretty much these days, and that really harms technology. I mean, and also this exclusionary contracting that a lot of hospitals are doing, where it's saying, okay, well, we're going to have 3 vendors, and that's it, because we don't want to deal with a lot of vendors and whatever. So the 3 vendors are invariably going to be the 3 largest companies, and then that leaves out in the cold all the smaller, more innovative companies that are doing great things, but they can't access the hospital because they're not these 3 companies. And that is a huge, huge barrier to innovation, because it's very difficult for a small company to be able to get into hospitals. And it used to be in the old days that if Dr. Smith wanted to use such and such implant, that's not on formulary, well, bring it in, fill out the form. And I remember those days, you fill out the form and there it is.
Right.
Well, there's nothing like that anymore. And, they've put up massive bureaucratic barriers to bringing in new technology. And it's really just about cost savings. And so that's, I think, the number one barrier to innovation in orthopedics today.
Sounds like a layered issue. Is there a solution?
Yeah, there's, I think the short-term solution, the only solution that I think works, at least today, is you have to be so innovative, you have to be so differentiating that the hospital has no choice but to grudgingly let your product in. And so that's one of the things that we've been focusing on with Orthomod, in that the fact that this is an all new material and an all new way of doing things, and it looks different and it feels different, and even a layperson can hold our implant next to a PEEK implant and see the difference. Ours is white and looks like bone, that's brown and looks like what. And and so it's so that's the thing. You have to work doubly and triply hard to make your product highly differentiated, and also have this very strong data that supports it. And you also have to come in at a cheaper price, or at maximum the same price. So you have to fight very hard to overcome these barriers, with the understanding that you're not going to get it everywhere. And so that's one answer. The other answer is working with surgeon-owned ASCs, where the surgeon does have more input into what they're using, into the types of implants that they've got. And obviously it's also very cost competitive, but at least you're able to communicate. At least you're able to, whereas with the hospitals, in many cases there's not even any ability to sort of communicate the features and benefits, so you just the door is just kind of shut.
Sure.
So those are the kind of ways you have to work 10 times harder, and then you also have to go to the places where, like ASCs, where the surgeons still have some say in what they're using. Long term, I'm not sure what the ultimate solution is going to be. I think, ultimately you're going to have a situation where the U.S. looks more like Europe and the socialized systems, and it's just things are just going to kind of go to the lowest bidder the way they are there, and so you have to. A lot of, I think, in the innovation in orthopedics in the future is going to have to be around cost cutting and how you can deliver a quality product at a very competitive price. And so those are the sorts of things that we all think about, and kind of keeps us up at night.
Well said, Dr. Kirschman, and we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time and insights. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Appreciate the opportunity.
And thanks again to Elos MedTech for sponsoring this edition of Ortho Innovators.